a farmer's son, gripping a wooden plough, dirt under his fingernails, resigned to a life of backbreaking labour. This is Hugh Calveley in 1330. But by 1362, he was lord of a manor in Cheshire. So how does a peasant actually break free from the iron grip of serfdom and rise to the top? Here are three men who cracked the code, and their strategies still work today. William de la Pole watched ships drift into Hull's bustling port, their hulls heavy with opportunity. While other peasants saw wool, William saw wealth. He thought, what if we could take a cut from every trade flowing through the port? Impossible in the 1300s, right? Think again. William and his brother Richard started small, buying wool from local farmers, selling it as far as Flanders and Italy. Slowly and methodically, they built their reputation until they dominated Hull's export trade. But dominating a single port wasn't enough to catch royal attention. What transformed them from successful merchants into serious players was scale and timing. By the mid-1320s, the de la Pole brothers weren't just moving wool. They were moving massive quantities of England's most valuable export. Their trade networks stretched across Europe, and their financial resources had grown to rival established noble families. Then came an even bigger opportunity. King Edward II, desperate for cash to fund his war with France, needed someone with some serious capital, and William was ready. But lending to kings was no small gamble. One wrong move meant his head on a spike, but the risk paid off spectacularly. The king granted them customs collection rights over everything moving through Hull's port, exactly as William had planned. Now he could do as he pleased, charging fees, managing shipping licenses, and crushing competitors who dared challenge him, all with royal backing. By the 1330s, William's loans to the newly crowned Edward III were practically financing his war with France. But kings have long memories, especially for those who back them when it matters. In 1339, William became Baron of the Exchequer and would have a say in handling the kingdom's finances. A world away from trading farmers' wool in Hull's grubby port. And by 1350, he wanted to give back, establishing a hospital and funding it with £66 annually, enough to buy 880 sheep. And when William died in 1366, his son Michael continued the family legacy, becoming Earl of Suffolk in 1385. William had cracked the code. From wool merchant's son to Earl's grandfather, he'd secured his family's wealth and status for generations. But let's be honest, maybe the merchant life seems too slow, too safe. What happens when you're willing to risk everything? Most farmers' sons accepted life behind the plough. Why wouldn't they? Serfdom was widespread, and being free felt like enough for most men. Hugh Calveley disagreed. While his friends pushed ploughs, Hugh dreamed of adventure. In 1337, when the 100 Years' War erupted, many people feared what chaos it would bring, but Hugh saw it as a golden opportunity. But in 1354, Hugh learned a harsh lesson. Captured in a failed raid against a French outpost, he found himself on the wrong end of the ransom business, and that's when it hit him. War wasn't just about killing, it was about money. And by the early 1360s, Hugh was ransoming prisoners like Bertrand du Guesclin, one of France's most valuable knights, the man who would go on to win the Battle of Cocherel in 1364. The ransom, 10,000 francs, roughly £13,000 then, or £80 million today. Not bad for a man destined to follow a plough his entire life. From farmer's son to knight to governor of Calais, Hugh left a lasting legacy. His tomb can still be visited to this day in Bunbury, Cheshire. Proof that if you're willing to risk everything, you can rise to the top. But what if violence wasn't your strength? What if your opportunity came not from war, but from disaster itself? When you only have 2 acres of land, that's barely enough to survive. But if you made it through the Black Death, everything changed. For the first time in centuries, peasants held the cards. Owning land meant nothing when half the country was dead, and there was no one left to work it. Clement Paston saw his chance, negotiating easier terms from desperate landlords looking for anyone who would rent their fields. But that wasn't enough for Clement. Some landlords were so desperate they had no choice but to sell. And Clement, with the small fortune he'd quietly accumulated, was ready and eager to buy. Within years, Clement went from 2 measly acres to 100 acres, even employing people to work his land, just like others had once employed him. But his real genius wasn't buying land or outsourcing production. It was investing in his son, William. Clement had acquired enough wealth to send William to study law, a cost equivalent to an ordinary peasant's lifetime earnings. The transformation was staggering. The gamble paid off spectacularly. William rose to knighthood, cementing his family's place among England's gentry for generations. The Paston family went from hiding in churches to avoid debt collectors to rubbing shoulders with royalty. Whether it's cornering a market, turning chaos into profit, or using crisis as opportunity, these strategies worked 700 years ago. They still work today. The only question is, which path will you choose? And which of these 3 peasants had the most impressive rise? William, Hugh, or Clement? Let me know below. And thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed.